In the far reaches of the galaxy, Empress Voritha ruled the Zelkari Dominion, a vast empire of cold and calculating alien species. The Zelkari were powerful, their minds capable of bending reality, and they dominated planets with ease. But Voritha's rule was not as secure as it appeared. The Empress, though feared, carried a terrible burden, one that could tear her empire apart if left unchecked. Every decade, the Zelkari Empress was required to feed on the essence of a species. This essence was a mysterious life force, a psychic energy that could only be harvested from humans. The Zelkari discovered long ago that human beings possessed a unique form of energy that could restore a Zelkari's strength and power. Without this essence, the Empress would begin to weaken, both physically and mentally, until she became a mere shadow of her former self. For centuries, this ritual had been carried out without fail. But this time, things were different. The Empress was running out of time. Voritha sat on her throne, staring out into the stars from the palace on her homeworld. The space around her was silent, but her mind was anything but calm. She could feel her strength slipping away. Her psychic abilities, once sharp and clear, had started to blur. Her senses, once so keen that she could hear the thoughts of her entire court, were now muffled, distant. She could barely focus, and the once powerful alien ruler now trembled under her own skin. Her advisors, once eager to serve her, now whispered behind her back. They were afraid. The time for the essence harvest was almost upon them, and she had yet to find a source. Worse, her enemies were already taking notice of her weakness. The whispers had reached the far corners of her empire, and a rebellion was quietly stirring. Voritha's fingers tightened around the armrests of her throne. She had ruled for over 3 centuries, her iron fist securing the Zelkari Dominion's dominance. But now, her throne was in jeopardy, not from an enemy fleet, but from her own failing body. The Empress had always known this day would come, but that didn't make it any easier to face. "Your Majesty," said the voice of Zarek, her chief advisor. His tall, thin frame appeared in the doorway of the throne room, his dark eyes gleaming with concern. He knelt before her, though his voice did not waver. "There is a matter we must discuss, a troubling development." Voritha's gaze never shifted from the stars. "Speak, Zarek." "The human colonies, they have started to fight back. They are no longer as weak as we believed." Zarek hesitated. "They have found a way to hide their essence from us." Voritha's lips curled into a faint, bitter smile. "So, they have learned to mask themselves. It does not matter. The harvest will be ours." Zarek lowered his eyes. "Your Majesty, the rebellion grows stronger by the day. The humans, they are preparing something. We don't know what, but it will be enough to stop us from taking their essence." The Empress finally turned her gaze towards her advisor. Her once regal appearance now seemed frail, her skin pale, her eyes hollow from hunger. "And what do you suggest, Zarek?" "We have to go to them, Your Majesty," Zarek replied urgently. "We infiltrate infiltrate their colonies ourselves and take what we need. There is no time left. If we fail—" His voice trailed off, the implication clear. Voritha's heart skipped a beat. The thought of venturing into human space, risking everything for a chance to feed, was a gamble. But there was no other choice. If she did not act soon, she would lose her crown. Worse, she would lose everything. "You will prepare a fleet," Voritha commanded, her voice steady, though her thoughts were in turmoil. "I will go myself." Zarek bowed low. "At once, Your Majesty." As he left the room, Voritha allowed herself a moment of weakness. She closed her eyes, focusing on the cold emptiness around her. There was no time for fear now. Her people needed her, and she could not fail them. She would have the essence, or she would die trying. She stood up, her once confident posture now betraying the weight of her hunger. The galaxy might fear her, but it was her own body, her own mind, that was now her greatest enemy. The clock was ticking. And soon, very soon, the humans would feel her hunger. Far from the reach of the Zelkari Empire, Deep in the heart of human space, a different kind of battle was being fought. Captain Elara Graves, once a respected fleet commander in the United Earth Forces, now led a group of rebels determined to protect humanity from the relentless alien invaders. After years of suffering under the Zelkary's rule, the human colonies had finally risen to fight back, and Elara was at the center of it all. Elara stood in the command center of the Resistance's hidden base on a small, forgotten moon. The dim lights flickered above her, casting long shadows over the walls. The room was filled with maps, holograms of enemy fleets, and the quiet hum of communication equipment. A team of soldiers, engineers, and strategists worked tirelessly, their faces filled with determination. But despite their resolve, Elara knew that time was running out. "The Zelkari are coming," Elara said, her voice cold and precise. "We've intercepted their transmissions. Their fleet is already on its way to the human colonies. If we don't stop them now, we'll lose everything." Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Jace Carter, stood beside her, eyes narrowed with concern. "Captain, we've known this day was coming, but we got a problem. The Zelkari are too powerful. We can't match their fleet head-on. If we try, they'll wipe us out." Elara clenched her fists, thinking hard. "We don't have to beat them in a direct fight. We just need to slow them down, buy us enough time to find a way to stop the Empress. If we can disrupt their plans, if we can find a way to block their essence detection, we might stand a chance." "But how?" Jace asked. "We've been trying for years to figure out how they track us, but nothing works. Their psychic abilities are too strong." Elara's eyes lit up as an idea began to form. "We've been focusing too much on their technology, their ships. What if the answer isn't in their machines, but in their minds?" Jace looked puzzled. "You mean their psychic abilities?" "Yes," Elara said, nodding. "The Zelkari rely on their psychic powers to locate us, to harvest our essence. What if we can disrupt their connection to our minds? We need to find a way to block their psychic probes, to hide our essence from them." The room fell silent as the others processed the idea. It was bold, dangerous, and untested, but it was their only hope. "We've already tried shielding devices," Jace said, "but they don't work. Their minds are too strong. What else can we do?" Elara turned to a nearby console and brought up a hologram of the Zelkari Empire. "We don't have the resources to fight them directly, but we do have something they don't expect. Humans. We've learned more about the Zelkari than they realize. And if we're right, there's a way to use our own unique abilities to fight back." One of the scientists in the room, Dr. Nadia Voss, stepped forward. "Captain, you're suggesting we use the very thing they need to survive. Our essence, against them. But how?" Elara's gaze was intense. "We need to create a device that blocks their psychic abilities, something that can shield us from their detection. But it won't just block them from finding us. It needs to make us invisible to them. Completely invisible." The room erupted in a mix of skepticism and excitement. A human-made device that could block the Zelkari's psychic powers. It sounded impossible, but Elara had never been one to back down from a challenge. "I know it sounds crazy," she said, "but we've been looking at this all wrong. The Zelkari's power comes from their connection to us, to our essence. If we can sever that connection, if we can create a barrier, they won't be able to track us. The Empress will starve." The idea was risky, and it would take everything they had to make it work, but it was their only chance. If they could block the Zelkari's ability to find them, they might be able to survive long enough to turn the tide of the war. Jace nodded slowly. "It's a long shot, Captain, but it's the best shot we've got." Elara's voice was firm. "We don't have time for anything else. Start working on the prototype immediately. I want that device ready before the Zelkari arrive." The Resistance members sprang into action, working around the clock. Engineers and scientists pored over designs, while soldiers prepared for the inevitable attack. The tension in the base was palpable. Everyone knew what was at stake. If they failed, humanity would fall. and the Empress would get what she wanted, their essence. But if they succeeded, the Zelkari would be left in the dark, unable to track their prey, and the humans would have a chance to strike back. As Ilara watched her team work, she allowed herself a moment of hope. It was faint, but it was there. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for freedom. And maybe, just maybe, they could win. The Zelkari fleet arrived in human space without warning. Their warships, sleek and deadly, cut through the stars, a fearsome force that sent ripples of terror throughout the colonies. Empress Voritha had sent them with one goal: to find and harvest human essence. It was the only way she could restore her strength before it was too late. As the fleet approached, the humans scattered into hiding, using every trick and technology at their disposal to evade detection. But Voritha, despite her weakening state, was not easily deterred. She could feel the energy of human minds all around her, even if she could not yet pinpoint them. Her frustration was growing. The psychic link to humanity, the very essence she needed to survive, was slipping through her fingers. In her private chambers aboard her flagship, Voritha clenched her fists, her claws digging into the metal armrests of her throne. Her once glowing skin had begun to lose its luster, and her eyes, once sharp and cold, now looked dull and clouded. She was growing weaker with every passing hour, and she knew that the rebellion's leader, Captain Ilara Graves, was at the center of it all. Voritha's psychic senses had already tried, and failed, to track her down. "Your Majesty, we have a problem," Zarek, her chief advisor, said, standing before her. His face was grim, his once confident posture now tinged with concern. "The humans have hidden themselves from us. Their ships are disappearing from our sensors. We cannot locate them." Voritha's sharp eyes narrowed, a low growl escaping her throat. "What do you mean, we cannot find them?" "The essence is here. I can feel it. Their technology is masking their presence," Zarek explained, his voice careful. "They've developed some kind of psychic shielding. It's blocking our ability to track them." "Psychic shielding." Voritha's voice trembled with rage. "No one has ever dared to block my reach. The fools. Find them. I want their hiding places destroyed." But Zarek shook his head. "It's not that simple. They're using a new kind of technology, something we've never seen before. It's powerful." Voritha's claws scraped against the throne as she tried to contain her frustration. She had faced many challenges in her life, but this was different. The human resistance, led by Ilara, had figured out how to fight back in a way that the Zelkari had never anticipated. Their minds were strong, their technology clever. They were not just hiding. They were fighting for survival. "We will find them," Voritha growled. "Prepare the ground forces. I will lead the hunt personally." Zarek hesitated. "Your Majesty, your strength is—" "I do not care," Voritha interrupted. "I will lead this hunt. I will find Ilara Graves, and I will take her essence. It will be enough to restore me." The Zelkari leader was resolute. She could feel the pressure mounting as the clock ticked down, and she could sense that her enemies were growing bolder. The longer she waited, the weaker she became. She had to act now. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, Captain Ilara Graves watched the Zelkari ships appear on her radar. Her heart raced. The time for hiding was over. The Resistance had been preparing for this moment, but now they had to execute their plan, and fast. "Status report," Ilara ordered, her voice calm but filled with urgency. "We've got a fleet incoming, Captain," Jace replied, his voice tight with tension. "The Zelkari are closer than we thought. We don't have much time." Ilara's mind raced. They had been working for months on the psychic shielding device, and it was finally ready. But she knew that it wouldn't be enough to stop the full force of the Zelkari. They had to strike first. They had to disrupt the Empress's hunt before it could begin in earnest. "Get the shielding online," Ilara commanded, "and prepare the fleet. We'll fight them head-on if we have to. We can't afford to let them get any closer." Her crew moved quickly, Each person focused on their task. The Resistance's ships powered up, their engines humming as they readied themselves for battle. Ilara took a deep breath. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. In the depths of the Zelkari fleet, Empress Voritha ordered her forces to descend upon the human colonies. She would not be denied this time. The essence was out there. She could feel it. She would tear through every last hiding place until she had what she needed. But even as her ships descended, she could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. Her psychic senses were growing weaker, not stronger. The human minds she could usually feel were now flickering in and out of her perception, like shadows at the edge of her vision. Where are they? Voritha muttered to herself, frustration growing in her chest. The hunt was proving harder than she had anticipated, and her enemies were proving more elusive than ever. The clock was ticking, and the Empress knew that if she did not find them soon, she would lose everything. Her power, her crown, her life. The darkness of space was suddenly lit up by the powerful engines of the Zelkari warships. They moved in a perfect formation, their sleek, silver hulls cutting through the stars like knives. Empress Voritha had given the order. No mercy. The hunt for human essence had begun in full force. Captain Ilara Graves stood in the command center of the Resistance's flagship, her fingers tight on the console in front of her. The room was filled with the quiet hum of technology, but the tension was almost unbearable. The Zelkari were close, closer than they had ever been. There was no more time for hiding. Ilara, Jace's voice came from behind her, filled with urgency. We're detecting the first wave of their ships. They're entering our space. What's the plan? Ilara took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the holomap before her. The Resistance's fleet was small, but they had one advantage: surprise. And the newly completed psychic shielding device was their secret weapon. If it worked, it could block the Zelkari's ability to track them and give them a chance to strike back. We don't engage directly, Ilara said, her voice steady. We draw them in, then hit them when they least expect it. They won't know where we are until it's too late. Jace nodded, quickly passing the orders to the rest of the crew. The Resistance fighters prepared themselves, each of them knowing that this would be the fight that determined whether humanity would survive or fall. Back on her flagship, Empress Voritha stood on the command deck, watching as the vast expanse of human space unfolded before her. Her senses were still clouded, the psychic link to the humans flickering in and out. But she could feel it. The essence was near. The time was drawing closer, and she would not allow these pathetic creatures to escape her grasp. Your Majesty, Zarek said, approaching cautiously, we have entered human space. But there's something strange. The humans are hiding their ships. We can't track them with our sensors. It's like they vanished. Voritha's eyes narrowed. They think they can hide from me, she muttered, her voice low and filled with rage. They are fools. No one escapes the Empress's reach. Despite her anger, a small part of her knew that this would not be an easy hunt. The humans had learned to fight back. Their technology was more advanced than she had given them credit for. But her hunger was driving her forward, and she would not let these insignificant creatures stop her. Search every corner of this system, Voritha commanded. I will find them, no matter what it takes. At the same time, Ilara stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the Zelkari ships approach. The psychic shielding was in place, but it had yet to be tested. The key to the success of their plan lay in its ability to block the Zelkari's psychic senses. If it worked, they would be able to strike without being detected. Status report, Ilara said, her voice sharp. Everything's ready, Captain, one of the engineers replied. The shielding is online, but we won't know if it's effective until we make contact with the enemy. Ilara nodded. Then it's time to test it. All ships, follow my lead. Prepare to engage on my mark. The fleet moved into position, with the Resistance ships hiding in the shadows of nearby asteroids, out of the direct line of sight of the approaching Zelkari. Ilara's heart raced, but her face remained calm. This was the moment they had trained for. They had one chance to disrupt the Empress's hunt. As the Zelkari fleet moved closer, Ilara gave the signal. "Now," she shouted. The resistance ships emerged from their hiding places, weapons charging. The Zelkari fleet was caught off guard, unable to detect the humans until it was too late. The first wave of fire from the resistance ships hit the Zelkari vessels, shaking them to their cores. The humans weren't running anymore. They were fighting back. "Engage with everything we've got," Ilara commanded. "We can't afford to let them regroup." The battle raged, the stars around them flashing with the light of weapons fire. Zelkari ships were hit, their shields flickering, but they quickly retaliated with precision strikes. The humans were outnumbered, but they fought with a ferocity that the Zelkari hadn't expected. The psychic shielding was working. The Empress's psychic reach was being blocked. She could no longer feel the humans in the same way. But despite the humans' surprise attack, Voritha's rage grew. She could feel the sting of every strike, and her anger fueled her determination. She ordered her forces to retaliate with all their might, sending wave after wave of energy blasts in the direction of the resistance. "We will not be stopped," Voritha screamed, her voice echoing through the chambers of her flagship. "They think they can defy me. I will make them regret it." As the battle continued to unfold, Ilara knew they couldn't hold the Zelkari off forever. They had taken the first step, but the fight was far from over. The Zelkari were not easily defeated, and Empress Voritha's power was still a force to be reckoned with. But for the first time in a long while, Ilara felt a spark of hope. The humans had struck a blow, and they had the Empress on the run. The resistance wasn't done yet, and the hunt for essence was far from over. The battle was far from over. The resistance had made a bold strike, but the Zelkari were not backing down. Empress Voritha's fleet had suffered some damage, but her warships were still formidable, and her psychic powers, though weaker, remained a dangerous threat. Captain Ilara Graves stood at the front of her command center, her face tense, as she watched the ongoing battle. The resistance had gained some ground, but she knew this was just the beginning. The Zelkari would retaliate, and they would retaliate hard. "Captain," Jace's voice came through the comm, filled with concern. "The Zelkari are regrouping. They've launched reinforcements from their flagship. We're outnumbered, and we can't hold them for much longer." Ilara's mind raced. They had known this was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. The Zelkari had the advantage of numbers, and their psychic powers were still too strong to ignore. The psychic shielding had worked for a time, but she could feel the pressure mounting. The Empress was getting desperate. "We can't let them push us back," Ilara said, her voice steady but urgent. "We've got one shot at this. If we can take out their flagship, the rest of the fleet will fall apart. They'll lose their command structure. We hit the heart of their power." Jace's voice was hesitant. "Captain, the flagship is heavily guarded. Even with our shields, we don't have enough firepower to break through. It's too risky." "I know," Ilara replied, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the battle. "But if we don't take this risk, we lose everything. The Empress is growing weaker, and we need to strike while she's vulnerable." Ilara turned to the rest of her crew, her voice loud and clear. "Prepare all ships for an assault on the Zelkari flagship. We'll target their command center. Take out their leader, and their entire fleet will be lost." The resistance ships moved into formation, ready for the dangerous mission. Ilara knew this would be their most difficult fight yet. The Zelkari flagship was a massive ship, bristling with weaponry and defenses. But Ilara had a plan. She'd studied the flagship's weaknesses, and she knew there was a way inside. A small opening in its shield that could be exploited. As the resistance ships closed in, the Empress's flagship loomed ahead like a dark fortress in space. Voritha stood at the center of her bridge, her eyes glowing with fury as she watched the human ships approaching. The psychic shielding had been effective for a while, but now the humans had grown bolder. They were attacking her directly. "Zarek, prepare the fleet for battle," she ordered, her voice sharp. "We will crush them. No more games. We will show them the true power of the Zelkari. Zarek hesitated. Your Majesty, I sense something strange. The humans are not acting like before. They're heading directly for the flagship. Voritha's eyes narrowed. They're desperate. They think they can win. Foolish humans. We will make them pay for their arrogance. Her fingers twitched as she reached for the control panel in front of her, ready to unleash a devastating psychic strike on the approaching human ships. But before she could act, a new feeling washed over her, a sudden, intense pain in her mind. Her psychic link to the humans was wavering, flickering like a dying flame. They've blocked me again, she murmured, her voice tinged with disbelief. How? Zarek quickly looked at the readings on his screen. The psychic shielding, Your Majesty. It's more advanced than we anticipated. The humans have found a way to disrupt our connection. Voritha's anger reached a boiling point. She stood up from her throne, her claws digging into the armrests. I will no to BD, she screamed. I will HAV, there is sense. The Empress's voice was filled with raw power as she extended her hand toward the enemy ships. She tried to focus her psychic energy, pushing through the interference, but it was like trying to reach through thick fog. The humans had figured out how to shield themselves, how to block her influence. On the bridge of the Resistance flagship, Ilara and her crew watched as the Zelkari flagship unleashed a powerful wave of psychic energy, an attack that could shatter their shields and destroy them all. But the shields held strong. It's working, Ilara said, a small smile crossing her face. Their psychic attacks are being blocked. We have an opening. All ships, prepare to strike. Target their command center. The Resistance ships surged forward, their weapons charging for the final push. Ilara's heart raced. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. The first salvo hit the Zelkari flagship shields, causing them to flare with energy. The Empress's psychic defenses were weakening. The human fleet pressed forward, firing again and again, aiming for the core of the flagship's command center. Inside the flagship, Voritha was losing control. Her mind, once sharp and invincible, was now clouded and chaotic. The humans were attacking from all sides, their weapons striking true. The pain in her mind was unbearable, but her rage pushed her to fight back, to try and regain her grip on the situation. But Ilara and the Resistance were relentless. The final blow was coming. The battle had turned into a storm. The Resistance fleet surged forward, firing everything they had at the Zelkari flagship. Sparks of energy flashed across the dark expanse of space, lighting up the void like tiny stars being born and dying in an instant. Ilara's heart pounded in her chest as her ship's weapons fired again and again, striking the flagship's shields. We're getting through, shouted Jace, his voice filled with excitement. Their shields are weakening, Captain. Ilara nodded, but she didn't allow herself to feel relief just yet. This was only the beginning. The Empress's flagship was massive and heavily armored, and though they had breached its outer defenses, the heart of the ship remained untouched. Their next move would determine everything. Keep up the pressure. Target the command center, Ilara ordered, her voice steady and focused. We can't let the Zelkari regroup. As the Resistance fleet continued its assault, Empress Voritha stood on the bridge of her flagship, her once perfect appearance now a mess of rage and desperation. Her psychic powers had been hampered, and her fleet was being torn apart. She had never felt so vulnerable. The humans had outsmarted her, and now they were on the verge of breaking her. You think you can defeat me? She hissed, staring at the holographic projections of the enemy ships closing in. She raised her hand, her claws trembling as she prepared to unleash a psychic storm that could obliterate everything in its path. But just as she gathered her power, another wave of pain surged through her mind. The psychic barrier that the humans had erected was stronger than she had anticipated. She could not reach them. Her grip on their essence was slipping, and without it, she was growing weaker. Her advisor, Zarek, stood by her side, his face pale. "Your Majesty, the command center is exposed. If we don't act now, they will breach it." Voritha's eyes widened with horror. She had been so consumed by her own rage that she had failed to realize how vulnerable she had become. The humans had broken her focus, and now they were striking at the heart of her power. "No," Voritha whispered to herself, her voice filled with disbelief. "This can't be happening. I will not lose." But deep inside, a terrible truth was starting to settle in her heart. She had been relying too much on her psychic abilities, on her connection to human essence. Without it, she was nothing more than a broken ruler, losing control of her empire. She had been too arrogant to see it. And now, the humans were at her doorstep. On the bridge of the Resistance flagship, Ilara watched as the Zelkari flagship's defenses began to crumble. The shields flickered and sparked, and she could see the command center within reach. This was their moment. "Ilara," Jace's voice came through the comm. "We've breached their defenses. The command center is wide open. We can take them out now." Ilara's eyes locked onto the enemy ship, her gaze filled with determination. "All ships, prepare for the final assault. We'll hit the core with everything we have. This ends now." The Resistance fleet, battered but resolute, moved in for the final push. They had come this far. They couldn't stop now. Ilara's mind was focused, her thoughts steady as she steered her ship towards the heart of the Zelkari flagship. Inside the flagship, Voritha could feel the weight of the situation closing in on her. The Resistance was breaking through, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Her mind, once sharp and powerful, now felt sluggish, clouded by the pain of her lost connection to the human essence. The desperation in her heart was overwhelming. "Your Majesty, they're almost at the command center," Zarek urged. "We need to act now." Voritha knew he was right. The humans had already broken through her outer defenses. If she didn't act, her reign would end, and she would fall. But despite the gnawing fear in her chest, she could not let go of her pride. She had been an empress for centuries. To lose now, to allow herself to be defeated by mere humans, it was unthinkable. A violent flash of psychic energy erupted from her, aimed at the oncoming human ships. But her power was no longer what it once had been. The energy, though fierce, lacked the strength it once commanded. The humans barely flinched as the psychic blast washed over them, their shielding holding firm. "Not enough," Ilara said quietly, her eyes narrowing as she guided her ship closer to the core of the flagship. The final assault came in a coordinated strike. Resistance ships fired in perfect unison, their weapons blasting through the final layers of the flagship's defenses. The massive ship shuddered as explosions rang out. The heart of the Zelkari flagship, its command center, was breached. Inside the command center, the Empress watched in horror as her control was ripped away. Her psychic energy, already strained and weak, flickered one last time before it vanished entirely. The humans had done the impossible. They had broken through. In that moment, Voritha's mind, once a fortress, cracked. She felt a cold emptiness wash over her, and for the first time in centuries, she realized what it meant to be truly powerless. She was no longer the Empress. Ilara stood tall in the command center of her flagship, watching as the Zelkari flagship began to break apart. The battle was won. The Empress's reign had ended. "We did it," Jace said, his voice filled with awe. "We won." Ilara took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the wreckage. The fight wasn't over. There would still be pockets of resistance to face, but this victory was a turning point. The humans had shown that even against impossible odds, they could fight back, and they could win. And in that moment, Ilara knew one thing for certain. Humanity's fight for survival had only just begun. The battle was over. The massive Zelkari flagship, once a symbol of unchallenged power, was now a twisted wreck floating in the void. Its broken hull drifted slowly, sparks flying from the shattered systems inside. The Resistance fleet had won, but the cost had been high. Captain Ilara Graves stood on the bridge of her flagship, her face grim as she watched the aftermath. The stars beyond the windows seemed to shine brighter, almost like they were welcoming humanity's victory. But Ilara knew better. This was just the beginning. "All ships, report in," she said, her voice firm despite the exhaustion she felt. One by one, her fleet responded. Ships had been damaged, many lives were lost, but they had done it. The Empress was gone. The Zelkary's once unstoppable force was broken. The humans had proven that they could stand up to the invaders, that they could fight and win. "Status on the Zelkary fleet, Jace?" Ilara asked, her eyes scanning the holomap of the battlefield. Jace's voice came through, filled with relief. "Most of their fleet has retreated, Captain. Those who remain are scattered and disorganized. We've won. The Empress is gone. We've crippled their command." Ilara took a deep breath. "It's over for now. But the war isn't finished. We've just broken their hold on our system. We need to prepare for what comes next." Jace nodded, his face somber. "The Zelkary won't give up. They'll come back, and they'll be angry." Ilara's eyes hardened. "Let them come. We'll be ready." Meanwhile, on the wreckage of the Zelkary flagship, the once proud Empress Voritha was a shadow of her former self. Her psychic powers, her greatest strength, were gone. The psychic link to the human essence had been severed, and now she was left alone, without the very thing that had made her powerful. She stood in the ruins of her command center, surrounded by flickering lights and the silent remains of her empire. She had lost. Her mind reeled from the defeat. Voritha had always believed that she was untouchable, that her psychic abilities and the power of the Zelkary were beyond challenge. But the humans had proven her wrong. They had fought back in ways she had never anticipated. They had turned her greatest weapon against her, and now she was alone, vulnerable. For the first time in centuries, Voritha felt fear. She looked around the shattered command center, her claws tightening into fists. "This isn't the end," she whispered to herself, her voice cold and filled with fury. "This is only the beginning. I will rebuild. I will reclaim what is mine." Voritha turned away from the wreckage, her mind already racing with plans for revenge. The humans had won this battle, but the war was far from over. She would rise again, and next time, she would not underestimate them. Back in the heart of human space, Ilara stood before a group of survivors. The resistance, now more than ever, needed to rebuild, to fortify their position. The Zelkary may have lost their Empress, but they were still a deadly enemy. Their forces might be weakened, but they were far from defeated. "We've lost a lot," Ilara began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Too many good people have died. But we've made a stand. We've shown the Zelkary that humanity won't be crushed. We will not be wiped out." She paused, looking out at the faces of the survivors before her, eyes filled with both sorrow and hope. "This is our chance. We have to build on this victory. Make sure the Zelkary never forget that we can fight back. This is only the beginning." Jace stepped forward, his face worn but resolute. "We'll rebuild. We'll train. And when the Zelkary come back, we'll be ready for them." Ilara nodded, feeling a sense of pride in her people. "We are ready. We'll fight for every inch of this galaxy if we have to." The stars seemed to shine brighter that day. Humanity had proven it could survive, that it could rise up against impossible odds. The war was not over, but the first real victory was theirs. The Resistance's fight had sparked something in the hearts of people everywhere. Across planets and colonies, whispers of their triumph spread, inspiring others to join the cause. The Zelkary, once thought to be unstoppable, had learned that humanity would not bow to them. And though Voritha still dreamed of reclaiming her empire, she had seen firsthand the strength of human will. It was a new dawn for humanity. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. The road ahead would not be easy, but the light of hope burned brighter than ever. And no matter what the Zelkary did next, the humans knew one thing for certain. They would never give up. Not now. Not ever. In the heart of space, Humanity had taken its first step toward a future where it would no longer be the prey but the hunter. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, the Zelkari understood what it truly meant to face the wrath of humankind. The war had just begun.